What's happening, fam? L.A.R movement still moving. Book is entitled Lessons from a Non-Custodial Father at Amazon Kindle and Create Space. A link will be in the description box below as usual. This video is entitled Consequences Can Last Generations. Salute the J Miller podcast, man. Farewell to you. You're always going to have my respect. You've been a stand-up dude since the minute I subscribe to your channel and saw your videos. So, Godspeed to you, bro. Here's the thing. We as a people in life, in some ways we're dealing with the consequences of the generations prior to us. You know, people know this, the term sins of the father, but consequences can be a positive or negative thing. You know, you inherit the good things from generations past, and you may inherit the generational curses that need to be broken also. And you also have to take into consideration you may create opportunities for generations that are coming after you, and you also may create curses for generations that are coming after you. We don't take into consideration that, you know, consequences last generations. Like, when we think about our issues from childhood to adulthood, they stem from our families and the things that were passed down in our families that we had to deal with as children that affect us as adults. And sometimes we are so wrapped up in either the inheriting the positive that we don't leave anything for the next generation. So I'm gonna start with that part right now. See, sometimes the people who came before you left you in a good space. They left you money. They left you land. They left you. They put up a game plan. You know, some people had businesses, and the kids inherit the business when the grandparents died, and the parents didn't want to take on into the family business. So, but they kept the money, not realizing that, you know, the money was a product of the labor and service that your family member created and the brand that they created in the community. So you may have inherited everything, but the consequence of their success, but you didn't take it to the next level, and you were selfish with it. So you may be dwindling down the opportunities of the generations coming up behind you. And then you have other people who take advantage of it and who build on what was done before them, and they take it to another level. And because they feel some type of obligation and duty and responsibility to not only respect what was passed down to them, but also respect the fact that this can do for their children what it's doing for them. Because people don't realize the freedom of inheriting success and enjoying it to the point where you want the same for the next generation. And some of us don't do that. Some of us get spoiled and get entitled and like, yeah, this is all me, but it's not all you. You didn't earn this. You inherited it because you inherited the work and consequences of doing the right thing from a generation or generations prior to you. You know, the same goes for generational curses, right? Where you don't take into consideration that, you know, your family is dysfunctional and you inherited dysfunction from the generations prior, who that may have been their coping mechanism, but it's detrimental to you and the generations coming after you, because now dysfunctional behavior is normal, and now you're raised up in dysfunction like it's normalcy, and then the consequences of, you know, I'll just say something like um, alcoholism. You know, now you may inherit that issue because now as a child you're dealing with being raised by alcoholics or people who have a dependency on whether it's alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, something, right? And because of that unhealthy dependency, it makes you maybe mentally and physically unhealthy. And now you pass that down to your next generation because you thought it was normal, and by the time you try to reverse it, I'm not saying it's too late, but you've already influenced the next generation in a negative way. And now the consequences that came before you will be there after you're gone. Because, like I said, consequences can last generations. So some of the habits that sometimes some of the habits that we have as a community, we blame on the effects of slavery, but we don't talk about our family structure during Reconstruction, our unity during that time, our ability during that time. We don't talk about our ability and unity during Jim Crow. And we had in Jim Crow, I think, brought along a lot of dysfunction. And I think we don't talk about the mix of those two things came to a head maybe in the 80s, with the dying off of the Reconstruction generation's knowledge. And what I mean by that is, say people like George Washington Carver may have been old enough to have, they had kids. He didn't have kids, but people of his era had kids, grandkids, right? And they would be your grandparents, great-grandparents. Some of that knowledge is in the land, people have farms in the countries. I remember some of my family members had like cleaning businesses, restaurants, daycares, and stuff like that. And because that era was dying out, and that knowledge of entrepreneurial spirit, actual business acumen, accounting, customer service died out, and I would say it started dwindling. It came to the end, I would say, in the 80s, because that was a Studio 54 era, right? Beginning of the crack era. But people forget about the heroin era before that. But whatever. So all of these things last from one generation to the next. That's how you hear people talk about, we lost a whole generation during the crack era to prison. And those consequences affected their children, and some of those guys who are grandparents now, it's affected their grandchildren. Not just but by the governmental, by them being criminals, or by government interference and just locking people up wholesale for nothing really. And whichever way they were absent in the family in that way. But also having prison ties and prison connections to be a normal thing. Now you're raised in a society where the system knows your family. So now the consequence is, granddad's in jail. Dad might wind up going to jail because cops know granddad and know dad might be going in the same direction, and now you as grandson might be next, or a nephew or something like that. So, you know, consequences can last generations. Same thing with kids, and some people haven't broke this chain of having a lot of kids by a lot of different people because you're looking for love. You know, it happened. It happened with you. It happened with your parents prior. Happened with your grandparents. You might hear about your great grandparents, but you you fall in the line with that because that dysfunction is so normalized in your family. You don't think 3 kids by 3 different people is a big deal, and it is. It is. But you know now your kids got it. Now your kids are dealing with the consequences of that because the consequences is when you do stuff like that, you have siblings that may be cohesively together, but they all have separate family ties. So some might have a closer relationship with the other half of the family than others. You get what I'm saying? And that creates its own jealousies and angers and all kinds of nonsense. So I hope y'all get what I'm saying, and it's making sense to that degree that I'm trying to tell you consequences to all of our actions. If I do something that's going to affect my child, my grandkids, and my great grandkids, so I try to stay on the straight and narrow enough to the best of my ability, so my future generations don't have to pay for things that I had to pay for in my generation when I was younger, because it's hard to make the buck stop here, but if you can make the buck stop here and turn the tide, you can give the next generation great consequences. They could come into a world and enjoy happiness. Like I say this and get out of here. I can, even in my own family, I can tell the difference between a kid who was born into who inherited a good situation with his parents, between a kid who inherited a bad situation for his parents. Their personalities wind up being completely different, even as children. And both can be happy kids, but it's just in a different way. So we out of here, man. Peace.